All right. What up, everybody? Welcome back. Today we'll be doing another session, a little live coding action. Today what we're going to be doing is continuing with our Brewbook app that we started building with React.js, React Native, Expo, and RecoilJS, which is kind of like the whole idea of this experiment. So we got started. This is our third session. First session, we got started by scaffolding out the app. Second session, we kind of dug into RecoilJS to see how it would handle state management and things like that. And today we're going to be adding a form to basically create those apps on the fly, and then hopefully we'll get to persisting those beers into the app's local storage. Again, we're not backed by a server yet. We'll probably get there, but what we'll do today is just store that on the local device. Once again, below you can see down there my Twitter and my GitHub. On the GitHub, you will find the repo for this actual Brewbook app. It'll be under Brewbook React Native, and I'll share the link again in the chat, and it'll also be in the description. I'm going to go ahead and pop that in the chat now so that anyone that wants to follow along will have it. Just open that up here, and we'll jump in, get started. Let me just go ahead and share this out. All right, so in the chat right now, you'll find the link to the repo. Again, it's open source. Just pull it down, clone it. You may have to install Expo CLI. I can put the chat for that, how to do that in the chat. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump in. All right, so to get started, again, this is the app we're going to be working on here. You'll see that we can do a little bit of design work here. We haven't gotten to this design yet. I'll show you the state that the app is in a second. But what we're going to do today is start adding a form. We probably won't do anything this fancy just yet. We'll start styling probably a little bit further in, but at least we'll get to the point where we can maybe add a name, the brewery, and kind of get that worked into our tab view here. And hey, maybe for fun, we'll see if we can get that splash screen and some of the aesthetics in place. All right, so I'm just going to dive in. I'm going to open up my terminal here. I'll zoom in a little bit so that you can see kind of clearly what we're doing here. And let's open up our code. So it looks like VS Code got a nice update. Let me zoom out a little bit. All right, so what we're going to do first is, as usual, we're going to start our server so we can get things up and running. So open up my terminal here, and I'm going to run npm start. And then we'll go over, while this is loading up, kind of where we're at. So this is going to start bundling it up. But basically where we left off last time is we were diving into Recoil, kind of seeing how we can get Recoil to render some of our beers and allow us to update them without re-rendering the entire page. So I'll go over that pretty quickly right now. Open it up in the web browser here. So it's going to start that up and compile that code. And again, we're using React Native here, TypeScript, Expo. Ooh, bright, right? All right, let's see what's going on. So here we had our beers, and you can see we made it so that when we update, we have this average rating showing here, and it's only when I click these updating the individual items. So it's not rendering the whole entire list like it was the first time. And this is part of the win that we've gotten from using RecoilJS, where we're updating single atoms and getting the benefit of having this hooked up to those individual brew atoms. We have an atom for each brew where we're updating that state, and I'll show that again in a second. And you can see we get the benefit of, like I mentioned, only the things we're changing re-rendering. So when we get to a list of a lot of beers or whatever you're cataloging, be it wine or maybe video games or maybe you're into books that you've been reading or whatever, as those lists get longer, we'll stick with a pretty good performance because we're only re-rendering what needs to be re-rendered. So, and as you follow along, feel free, if you have any issues, run into any issues, put it in the chat. Happy to walk you through. I'd love to have people follow along. And I mentioned in my last video, if anyone's interested and wants to kind of dive in, the repo is open source, so you can submit a PR. We can review it together on stream at some point. So feel free to make it your project as well. Clone it, change it, make it not deal with beers. Maybe, like I said, you want to do wines or books or video games or maybe TV shows that you want to watch, like a watch list. It's just a general cataloging app, so you can really do whatever you want with it, kind of make it your own. All right, so that's this view. And I also want to go and just check that our native view will run on an actual iOS simulator. So I'll power that up, get that running. Let's see what it looks like. So again, I have an iPhone X here. You can see it'll render in a second with the notch, like the classic iPhone X. and we'll see what it looks like on the device. We're going to be using the web browser for a little bit of the development, only because it has that awesome React DevTools. And the benefit of that is it actually allows us to see when things are re-rendering. However, we're going to get to a point where we will no longer be able to use the web browser because we're going to be hooking into some native APIs, some of which may be supported by web. For example, if we do local storage within the app, on the web browser, it may be storing to local storage, but on the device, it's going to use something called async storage, which is different. We might be able to get a way for it to save on both, regardless of the platform, where we can use async storage when we're on native and use local storage when we're on web. But we'll see that when we get there. We don't really have anything to persist yet, and that's why we're going to be adding our form and kind of jumping in and adding some beers and seeing where we get and actually creating things instead of using that hard-coded list. All right, so let's let this spin up here. Okay, so this is going to be loading up. So while that's loading up, let's take a look at where we left off in our actual app. And you can see down here in the terminal, it's showing us the compile step, which is really cool. You can see it just said it's finished. We can pull it up, and there's our beer app. Dismiss that warning. So that's looking for keys on the items, so we'll probably want to add that. But there we go. We can see we have our list here. Our list is scrollable. We're going to get rid of this. This isn't in our design. It was just kind of a way for us to test to see that things were rendering appropriately and make sure that we're getting the benefit out of recoil that we wanted. Obviously, we have these orange circles where our images will go, so it'll be pretty cool to get to that. I'm not sure if we'll get to the camera API right now and actually be able to upload those images, but who knows? We'll see how far we get. Again, we're going to be coding here till about 11 p.m. So yeah, hope you're along for the ride and have some fun. We got poggers in the chat from Noah. Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. All right, so let's jump in a little bit. We'll kind of recap what we did. So again, we have our basic app. We're using React Navigation, which is giving us that really cool tab view at the bottom here. We haven't done anything with tab 2 yet, but we're going to maybe we'll use that today to make our form. And then what we have is our navigation component, which right now, if we open that up, we have our navigation comes from navigation. And so we have up here, we got my components, brews, there's navigation, and there's our navigation file. And in there, we're rendering a navigation container with a root navigator and some screens. So we have our root screen, and then we have in our components, we have this bottom tab navigation. So this is how we get to our tab 1 and our tab 2. And you can see it's even got some stuff for the web aspect of it where it gives it a name. And that's how we end up getting, if we go here, our URLs. So we have our all brew screen, we got tab 2. So pretty cool there. And then within that, we have a few of our screens. So we have our all brew screen. That's the screen we've been working with so far. So if I go there, it's going to be over here. Let's see, we got screens, all brew screen, and there's our base screen. And in there, we're rendering a view with our brew list. And this is where our actual code has been going. So we have our brew list. We have a type called a brew. And again, we had this brew list where we were going through this map of hard-coded brews that we put in this constants file. I'll pull up now. We called it brews. And it's just a hard-coded list of brews. And we'll get rid of this as soon as we actually can add brews. But maybe we'll start off by seeding our local database, as you would say, or like a local storage with these brews. But ultimately, we're going to be wanting to add them ourselves and create them on the fly. A hard-coded cataloging list is not going to really help anybody. It's just been useful for us testing out Recoil and kind of getting some experience with the state management that Recoil provides. So we created from this hard-coded list, and we used this this list to create this list of brews here with the brew ID and brew info, and then we then pass that to the brew items. And then this is where the interesting part happened. Our brew items then took that information that was sent to them and created like a local component state. But instead of it being a local component state, we actually hooked into RecoilJS. And this is where we got the cool benefit. So we use this thing called a recoil atom, which you'll see here. We have this brew with ID atom. And what we did is we took our brew, we have our brew name, brewery rating, and we called use recoil state. And we called this function we've imported as an atom. So I'll pull that up now. So all this is a function that creates an atom, and it's memoized. And the reason it's memoized and for that we used memoize, is so that we can call this function as many times as we want. And since it's a pure function, if we call it with the same arguments every time, it'll give us the same thing. So we won't be recreating these atoms if we're calling it with the same ID. And we got the idea from this from the RecoilJS video on the RecoilJS website. So we pass an ID, and it creates an atom for us with a key and some default information. And then what we did is after the page loaded, we called setBrew with ID, passing it the information. So now we had an atom for each brew item. So what I mean by that is for each of these brew items here, they had their own atom where they could have basically handle doing modifications to that state. So we added a plus button and a minus button. When you call that, it would increase the rating or decrease the rating. And it would do that by calling setBrewItem, which came from our useRecoil state. So Noah said, question on memoization. Do you only get the effect if it's the exact same ID being passed in? Yes. So the way memoization works with pure functions. And what I mean by that is a pure function is a function that takes a set of arguments and will, given the same set of arguments, always return the same thing. So something that is a pure function could be like an add function. You pass it x, y, and it will always return x plus y. So if you change x and y, it'll return the new value. For example, if I call add with 5 and 4, right, x being 5, y being 4, I'll get 9. If I call it again with 5 and 4, if the function's memoized, it will say, hey, this function's already been called with these arguments. Instead of doing the computation, I can just return 9 because that was a previously returned result. So in this case, if we call this function with the ID of 4, let's say that's one of our brew IDs, it'll initially create the atom and return it and store that function. It'll basically say the function ID4, when ID4 is passed, it will return this atom. So when it's called again, instead of recomputing and recreating that atom, it'll actually just return the original response. So it's very powerful. Memoizing functions is very great when you're dealing with pure functions for making sure you're not recomputing things all the time. And that's how we're able to get one atom per brew, even though these atoms may mount and unmount a few times. As long as this function's memoized and we're calling it, we'll get that same atom. So yes, we only get this effect if it's the exact same ID being passed in. When we load up another brew, when another brew gets mounted, it will call it with a different ID and get a new atom. So what we end up with is one atom for each of our brews. Then we had this average rating. It's really cool. Memoization is awesome. I talked about on one of the sessions that one day I think we'll do a session where we implement memoize. It's pretty easy to implement, and you could probably imagine it yourself right now. If you have a pure function that takes arguments and you do the initial first time you see it, you compute it and return a result. What you do is you cache those arguments in that result in some kind of object that's stored during the course of the application in memory. So for example, if I called the add function with 5 and 4, before returning 9, I'd create a cache. And in that cache, I'd have a key of 5, maybe 5, 4 or something, and a value of 9, so that I know when the arguments get passed in, I first see if they're in my cache. If they are, I return the value. If not, I compute and then store the value. So it's a pretty cool thing. We'll definitely, I think, use this session to create a memoize function because it's pretty cool. It's a good experience getting used to, learning about context and learning about closures. So it should be pretty fun. But right now, we've used this thing called memoize. All right, so let's take a look at average rating. So what we do with average rating is we wanted a way to have a component read from these atoms and read from their state. And we wanted to test that. You can see here, I wanted to test that when I change the state of one of these brews, the whole list doesn't re-render, which is what was happening originally. And you can see when I change these, the only thing that re-renders is what's being highlighted. So in this case, this brew and the rating. You can see the other brews are not being re-rendered, which is a fantastic optimization, especially when this list gets long. So for the average rating, the way that the average rating is consuming those atoms is the average rating is using this thing called a selector. It's built into Recoil. What a selector does is it takes things that exist in atoms and it picks pieces of them and returns a new value. Again, it's a pure function. This is not something that's being stored as an atom. It is instead computed from values within atoms. So in this case, you have your key. We have a get function. and we grab our brews. We do that by mapping over our constant array of brews. We call brew with ID to get that each individual brew atom. And then we use a reduce function. It's a perfect use case for a reduce function to take all of our brew atoms, reduce over them, and get the average. And the way we do that is we reduce over them, we return, we're basically summing them. So we're taking the current brews rating, adding it to the next one's rating, and then dividing by the total brews. So kind of cool. But really, this isn't in our design. It's not totally useful. So let's kind of walk back a little bit, and we'll start creating that form where we can actually create brews, and we're going to want to store them somewhere. So one thing we could do is we could start with the storage. We could take our hard-coded list and persist it. Or what we could do is start with our form. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this tab 2 for now, and we'll rename it to something different. We'll use this to actually create our form where we'll be adding and creating brews. So let's go ahead and first let's change the names of these tabs so that there's something a little more useful. We'll call this one brew list, and we'll call this one new brew or add or something. And then eventually we'll get closer to our design where we actually have them grouped by breweries. We have an add button in the middle and another tab for breweries. But for now, we'll just use that second tab. So let's go over to our navigation, bottom navigation. And here you can see they have a name. I'm going to change the name of this to brews, and I'll change this one to add brew. Save that, and now we can see we have brews and add brew, and this is where we'll be doing our form. So instead of rendering, in this case, you can see we have for our first one, we have the component is tab 1 navigator, and if I open up tab 1 navigator, we can see, let's see, where is that? Tab 1 navigator is here. Tab 1 navigator is rendering a stack navigation, and its first component is the all brew screen. So we're going to be dealing with tab 2 navigator. We're going to call it the add brew screen. And instead of using the tab 2 screen component, we're going to modify the tab 2 screen component to be that add brew component. So let's first find that tab 2 screen component, and we'll modify it. Here's the tab 2 screen. I'm going to just pull that over here. Go back to our bottom navigation, and let's change this to be called add brew screen, because it seems like that's like the trend within the screen file. We name it screen, and what we'll do is we'll change this to be we'll leave that container, we'll leave it there, we'll get rid of this title, and we'll change it to add brew. We'll get rid of that separator there, that divider. We don't really need that right now. And let's just make sure all of this works. We're going to change the file name to from tab 2 screen to add brew screen. So let's go ahead and modify this to add brew screen. Classic naming. Update imports. So this is really cool. Might be tough to see on the screen because of how small it is, but it will actually update your import. So VS Code knows you're changing a file name. It knows where it's imported. It'll update it. So you'll see this get updated. So let's say yes. And you'll see here now that tab 2 screen is coming from add brew screen. Instead of calling it tab 2 screen, let's call it add brew screen. All right, and then just to be consistent with our, if you look at our all brew screen right now is just rendering tab 1. We can get rid of that. We don't need that. And we can get rid of that view as well because we're not using that. And that'll clean up our first page. And if we look at our screen now, we have our add brew screen. There's our brews screen. So we're good to get started now. So we're going to be implementing a form. Common use case of any web development, but we're doing it with React Native. So we're going to be doing it slightly different than maybe what a regular web form would look like, where you're dealing with inputs. In React Native, it's a little bit different. However, there's a lot of libraries that can help us deal with form input, especially some newer ones that help us with hooks. We don't have to use a library. We can start off not doing it and add one when we get there. So we can do that. And one of the ones that we'll be trying soon at my current place of work is this one called React form hooks. And so maybe this is something we'll try out here as a way for me to kind of vet it. But basically what this is it's a library that helps you deal with forms in React for both React and React Native, and deal with it using React hooks. So an API that we're already familiar with. And you can see it has a web version and a native version. So this is something we might want to pull in. But for now, let's just put the inputs, and then we'll kind of touch upon it later. And you can see here we're getting a preview of kind of how we're going to do that. So we have a view with some text and some text inputs. So let's do that. Let's create an input for the brew and the brewery name. And then for now, maybe we can hard code the style and eventually make that a dropdown. So let's go over to our add brew screen and start creating some of those forms. So let's create a container for that form. I'm going to go ahead and say styles dot form container. This way we have a place to contain our form. I'll put a text here, and this will act as a label. You can see they have that here going on where they have a text and they're doing that as a label. With React Native, I'm not sure if there's a way to actually map the text field as the label to the input, kind of like what you would do in web, but maybe we can look up and figure that out and see if that's possible. And the way I would do that is I'd basically either pull up the React Native docs, or usually Expo has some really great documentation and links to the React Native documentation when it's needed. So if I were to go in here and search form or input, we can find our text input, and you can see some of the ways they're using them here. So I don't say anything about labels, so we'll just write our own for now, and then we'll go from there. But so what we'll do is we'll do a text, and we'll call this, let's do this. Let's do a text input, and then maybe we can just use a placeholder instead of a label. So do text input. And then the way text input works is it can take some properties. We can actually go to our React Native docs. Let's see. Here we go. So here's some of the props that it takes. Auto capitalize. So what I want to see is if it has a placeholder. So there's placeholder, so we'll use that. So what we'll do is we'll say placeholder. Yeah, Expo docs are fantastic. Really good. And our placeholder here is brew name. And then we'll just copy that, and we'll do brewery. And eventually maybe we'll have like a list of breweries, right? So we'll store the ones you've added in the past and auto suggest them and let you add new ones. We could also eventually pull from a list of known breweries. Same thing for style, right? We can have a set list of styles and let you add your own, or at some point make a request to a database of some sort to pull the list of known styles. I'm sure there's literally infinite, right? Everyone comes up with their new one. You have slushy style, hazy, New England, lactose, oat whipped, IPAs. So it gets crazy. So I think the ability to just add your own might be perfectly fine for now. So we'll say style. Gotta get those hazy boys. And we need to add a style form container. That's why this is complaining. So we'll do that. Let's get rid of separator. We're not using that anymore. And let's create a style for our form container. And for now, we will just do flex1. And we will just probably leave it at that. I don't think we want to add anything just yet to that. Let's see how this looks as we go. Okay, so there's our input. You can see it's very basic. We can customize that a bit. And you can see it's kind of centered there like that. We can get rid of that by just getting rid of that. Now you can see it's over there. And what we can do is we can have this. We can actually start to style these to make these the full width. So let's add a style for all of our inputs. So what I'm going to do is just multi-select here. Style equals styles dot, we'll call it input for now. If we want to make it less kind of general later, we can do that. But for now, this will do. And so for our input, if we want to kind of make it look a little bit like our styling, it looks like we're just doing, in this case, this is kind of the style I went with. We can obviously change this, but I'm doing just kind of like an underline with the name. So let's do that. So let's first start with some padding so that it's not all jammed up like that. So we'll do padding, and we'll do a padding of 12. Let's see what that looks like. And then let's do a border bottom color. And we'll do, for now, since we have a white background, we'll just do like a 666, number of the beast. I think we have to do it like this. And then let's see what that looks like. Okay, so we just need to probably add a border bottom width 2. Should give us a thick, yep, border bottom. So you'll see that the border extends beyond our thing here, and that's because we use padding. So what we could do instead is use padding for the top and bottom. So we could do 12 for the top. We could do 0 for the sides and see what that looks like. I think maybe we have to do it like this in React Native. I don't totally remember. Maybe not. We could also probably, I think, you know what it is? It's padding horizontal. And so for that, we'll say 0, and then it's padding vertical. So a bit different than web, but you get the idea. All right, and then what we can do is in our form container, we can add padding, and that'll push everything in a little bit. And we'll do that horizontal. So we'll say padding horizontal, and we'll give it something like 12 for now. There. So we have that, you know, kind of brew thing laid out. It's not aligned with the title. We'll deal with that later. But as you can see, if I click here, you won't see the keyboard open up, but we can make that happen. Basically, I can go to hardware up here, device, not device, keyboard. And then you have this option for toggle software keyboard. And then I'll pull up this. I could also type, which is what I'll do, but just so you can see what that looks like. So we can say test. And then you can return, go here. And we can even make it so that they can tab through. If we kind of like wrap this in a type of form thing, they'll be able to actually tab through each step, which is what we eventually want. But for now, we'll leave it at this. And you can see the placeholder appears when we are done typing. And let's make it a little bigger because it's a little bit small. It's probably pretty hard to see on the screen there. So let's see what we can do about our text inputs. So let's see placeholder text color. That'll help it stand out a little more. Let's do that for sure. So for that, under input, it's a property, so it's not a style. So we actually have to put it on each of our text inputs. Oh, just hover it on that. And we'll do the same color. We'll do 666, number of the beast. I'm just gonna format it. And now if I pull it up, cool. So it's a little bit darker. So it stands out a little more. We'll probably make it a little lighter, you know, when we start to match the designs. But again, right now we're just trying to get the functionality down before the design stuff. So we have this brew name, brewery, style. What else are we going to want to track? We're going to want that rating. So where is that? Here. Style, eventually we'll make a drop down, rating, and description. I don't think we had description in our hard-coded brews. I can find out. Yeah, we didn't have description, but we can add that. We're going to want it, right? What's the point of cataloging a beer if you can't tell us what you think of it, right? A rating's great, but you want to have a description. I'm sure if any of you have ever been on Beer Advocate, you've seen these descriptions using acronyms, people talking about how it tastes on the nose and the tail and the aroma. They're getting wild with it. We want to let them get wild here, so we'll do that. But for now, let's do rating next. So we'll just copy this. And we'll stick with just these ones for now, and then we'll start hooking up our form, and we can always add more inputs later. It's more important to see the functionality of how to add a form, how to create a brew than to style and do things like that. We will get to that because it is fun, but right now we just want to get to this important part. Let's just close that. And let's take a look at our input docs again and see if we have a type. The reason I want to see if we have a type is just like an input on the web. You have different types for like number and text. So I want to see if we have something like that. Text content type, text break. Let's see. Let me do like a search for keyboard type. So you can actually specify the keyboard type. That's pretty cool. That'll help us pop up the right keyboard. We definitely want to do that. But let's look for like number. Let's see. What do we got in here? Allow font scaling, allow capitalization, autocomplete type. That's kind of cool. Specifies autocomplete hints for the system, so it can provide autofill. That's pretty sweet. On Android, the system will always attempt to offer autofill by using heuristics to identify the type of content, and you can disable it. So that's pretty cool. So we could definitely do something like that. Autocorrect, autofocus. So autofocus will drop in focus when we get to the screen. We definitely probably want to do that with the first one, the brew one. So let's try that. That sounds pretty cool. So let's take a look at what it does right now. So if I click here and I click here, it doesn't focus on any of them. So let's turn autofocus on this one. Nothing yet. Let's see. If true, focus the input on component to mount. The component mounted already. That's one of the issues here. So let's see if we refresh it. There we go. So there it goes. It pops over this thing. We probably want to actually change that because we don't want to just do it on component mount, because the thing is with these tabs, the component stays mounted. That's how you're able to switch really fast. We can change that to optimize it. You might say, hey, why would you want it mounted if it's not in view? It is literally so you can switch back and forth. We're not going to want to do that because our add brew is eventually going to be almost like a modal. Like it won't stick around, right? You're going to create a brew and you're going to move off it. You're going to create a brew, add it. It's going to take you to the brews list, show it. And then when you go back to add brew, you want it to be cleared. So we'll eventually do that. But just for now, just some logistics of how the navigation works. All right. What else? Content menu hidden, data detector types, terms of the types of data converted by clickable URLs, default value, we don't need that. Editable, autofill, let's see, keyboard appearance, keyboard type. So this is definitely something we talked about that we want. So for rating, we'll want to let them pick a rating of 1 to 5. Maybe we just make inputs like, like the star rating. We could do like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like you click them. But for now, let's just go with number and let them type it. And we'll have them type any number from 0 to 5. But let's see, on change, that's how we're going to hook into like actually storing these things. On focus, on key press, on scroll, let's see, on text input, placeholder. All right, let's scroll down here. Selection, selected text focus, text align. So a lot of options. Very good, very good. Value is focus, blur. Okay, so let's just go ahead with keyboard type for now. And let's check Expo too, because the reason I want to check the Expo docs on this is because Expo, like we saw, provides the web version. So I want to make sure, I guess this is the Expo. Okay, good. I want to make sure I'm using something that's going to be compatible. So what we'll do is we'll do keyboard type, and we'll go with number pad for that one. I'm not sure what the difference between number pad numeric is. Let's find out. So let's go with, this is for rating. And you can see it gives us all the options. Let's go with number pad. Let's see what that looks like. Oh yeah, it looks like a phone thing. Let's see what numeric looks like. That makes sense now that I hear it. Reload that. Okay, so same thing for the numeric. Cool. All right, so we'll keep that there for now. We'll let them put in whatever for now, but eventually we'll want that like rating thing. And I'm sure you could actually probably find, like, if I were to search rating component React Native. I'm sure we could find something. Oh, React Native elements. Something like this. Very cool. But we'd want to find something that works well with Expo because we're not really pulling in any native stuff ourselves. We want to make sure that we can find something that we can actually pull in with Expo, and maybe this is one that we can do. So something to consider. Let's see how this thing gets used. So it has some awesome props. Let's see what the installation for this looks like. Ah, nice. That's awesome. Check this out. Expo create React Native app pops right up. npm install React Native. Yo, maybe we pull this in right now. I don't know. I know, why build it, right? Startup life, buy, don't build. Let's remind me tomorrow. Also, startup life, don't ever take updates from your operating system. Yep, Let's see. If you see an unmet peer dependency, warning for React Native vector icons like below. You can store vector icons. Okay. Let's check this out. Let's see. Rating can be pretty cool. I don't like the stars. I'd like to be able to customize that at some point to make it something like beers. That's like untapped though. Be cool to have like a beer that kind of fills. Whatever. We'll get crazy with it later. I bet it lets you pick a icon. Let's see. Rating image. Water image. What is that? Oh, wow. They're getting weird with it. Letting you do decimals. All right. Yo, let's do it. Let's pull it in. First, though, let's mess with the inputs that we have so we don't get too crazy and go down a rabbit hole of adding this bad boy before we get to actually figuring out how to do the input stuff. So before I get ahead of myself, let's do this. Let's comment out rating for now. Cool thing about VS Code, JSX now, you can comment that out. Awesome. I remember when I first did React and JSX, I could not for the life of me figure out how to comment out things. And it was right there. So obvious. You just make it evaluate a comment. All right, whatever. Now it does it for you, so I don't need to worry about it. Okay, so how does text input work? How are we going to record these values? So we're going to do it with local component state. We're going to store these things. And the way you do that is we can give them references. We can actually do what's called, not references, but onChange. We can have an onChange function. And we can give each of them a different onChange function. And you'll see that stuff like this, React form hook, which is very blurry, not only on the stream, I'm sure, but on my screen. It does something cool where it lets you, it handles kind of doing that stuff for you. You'll see here if I play it. Let's see if we can watch this together. Basically what this does is it lets you attach those onChange things, but kind of bundle them and pool them. So you'll see here, they're calling use form. They have this register function and a handle submit and a set value function. In their use effect, they're going to do some setup. They're listening to change on the register. They're registering a bunch of different input names, first name, last name. In our case, it would be brew, brewery, style. They then hand those over to onChange text. They give it a function. It's going to call set value on that name and the text. Set value again was imported, right? And then instead of just calling a plain on submit, they call a handle submit, which is coming from, if you see right there on line 11, the thing. So we can definitely pull this in, but let's first kind of give it a shot of just doing it on our own really quick, and then we'll see what the benefit is, right? It's harder to see the benefit if you don't try to do it by hand. I know I've done some of this stuff, but hey, it's a very simple form. Let's just roll our own really quick. So what we'll do is we'll have a few different functions. Handle, brew name change, and you're going to see how repetitive it is and why something like that's beneficial. And eventually we don't need to do like handle brew name change, handle this name change. We can have a general function and have our individual inputs call that function with some kind of identifier as to what input we're dealing with. But for now, let's go with this. So handle brew name change. We'll do handle brewery name change. We'll call it brewery change. Handle style change. Sounds like a cool skateboard trick. Style change, I like it. And so what we're going to do with these is we need some state to change. So we're going to set some state up to handle and hold the state for each of these inputs. And for that, we're going to use good old use state. So this is doing star as React. So that would mean we would do like react.useState. We're going to backpedal a little bit and just import React and then the things that we need. Use state, one word. All right. And then we're going to go ahead and create some state variables for that. So we'll call it brew name, set brew name equals use state. We'll start out empty. Empty string is what we're going to use for our oh, brewery. Nice. Typo catch. Thank you for that. Brewery. Cool. Good catch. All right. So thank you, Noah, for that. So we have our default state here for the brew name. We'll do the same for brewery, which I now know how to spell. Thank you. And here we'll do style, set style. All right. Cool. And then basically what we're going to do is we're going to listen to those on change text, which happen when you change the text to the text input. And we'll call these functions to then set the state. And that'll keep the value up to date. So if you have a value here, we'll set the value equal to brew name. And here we'll set the value to brewery. And here we'll set it to style. And then we'll have each of these inputs call their corresponding functions. And you can see there's a little bit of repetitiveness, right? We have one for each. Oh, handle brewery chains. Thank you. Yes. Brewery. Thank you. Good catch. I'm so bad at spelling. You're going to see that as we go. Okay, so let's go ahead and attach these. And you'll see, yeah, we have one for each, so it'd be nice, like you saw with the form hooks, where they only have one. Nice and crisp. All right, so what we'll do is we'll add in onChange text. So there's onChange and there's onChange text. OnChange text is what we want. It's when you're actually typing the values. OnChange, if we pull it up, there's a subtle difference. It's worth going over. OnChange is called when the text inputs text changes. This would be called with count target. OnChange text callback. This is called when the input changes, but it just passes the changed text. So instead of getting the native event with the target and the text, we just get the text. Now, you could argue that we could actually use onChange. And remember I mentioned we can like pass some identifier for what thing changed. So we could do onChanged and have the target, check the target, and set the appropriate state, which would give us only one function for changing things. But for now, we'll go with onChange text because it's just a very simple API, and we can optimize later. So for this, we'll call handle brew name change. Copy this down here, copy this down here, and handle brewery change, handle style change. And then in these functions, we actually have to do something. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually call the corresponding thing. So we're going to say set brewery in this case, or we'll do set brew name. And here we can do set brewery. And here we're going to call set style. And what it's going to pass us is the changed text. And you'll see it's complaining because it's like, hey, you're not using it, but also it doesn't know what it is because we're dealing with TypeScript. So we're going to tell it it's text, or it's a string. So copy that, paste that here. All right, so now that knows it's a string. And what we'll do is we're going to call it with, we're going to set the brew name equal to the new text. And do the same thing here. So what I can do is I use my multi-cursor. You'll see I do that a lot, but it's very beneficial. Saves me some time. Okay, so that's great. We have this new state, but what are we doing with it? We're not doing anything with it yet. So what I'll do is for now, just add a button that we'll click and it'll log us out our current state of the world. Why do we do that? Just to show that we're properly storing stuff, and then we'll eventually actually create brew items with it. But this will give us an opportunity to test things a little bit. So what I'll do is I'll add outside here, I'll add a touchable, I can do opacity or highlight. Let's do a highlight. Again, this is just a button. And then on press, so we'll give it, well, first we'll give it some name. So with touchable highlight, you have to put text inside it, which is interesting. So we'll put text, we'll say, show me the values, yay. And on press, again, just like on click, but we're dealing with React Native, so we call it on press. Let's call a show values, or we'll say, yeah, show values. It's a function that doesn't yet exist. We're going to make it exist. We're going to call it up here, const, or we'll call it log values. Log values equals. It's just a function. It's not going to do much. Change this over here. Log values. All right, so there's our log values function. We're just going to console.log, and we'll log each of our values here. So what I'll do is I'll just copy this. Again, just making a shortcut. Going down here, and we'll do values. Copy that. And don't worry, I'll format in a second. There we go. And what I'll do also is, let's just give it a nice. There we go. So that'll log everything out. So let's try it. Let's go to our form here. Let me just close this so we can see if our button's there. So there's our button. It looks terrible, but whatever. We don't need it to look good. And let me open it up in the web version so that we can actually see the log. I mean, you can see the log from this. It'll show up in two places. It'll show up here. And it also show up in here, I believe. Or sorry, in here. So let's try that. Let's just do brew name. Someone give me a brew name. No, give me a name of your favorite beer. All right. Let's see. Nothing? All right, I'm going to guess. Let's do KCBC, yes. Which one? There's so many good ones. All right, I'll put that as the brewery. Kings County Brewers Collective. Check them out if you haven't heard of them. There's so many. Just search it. Let's do it. Let's search together. It'll be fun. KCBC beers. I like the one with the octopus on it. I forget what it's called. Let's see. Yes. If you're not on stream, close your eyes. And there's so many good ones. Let's go. Ooh, Hopper Ale Spritz. I haven't tried that. That sounds awesome. All right, let's just go with this. Marble of Doom. Sounds good. Marble of Doom. And it's a sour ale. Let's put that. Dangerous Precedent. All right, let's do that. That's a good one. Dangerous Precedent IPA. We'll go with. We'll say that's the style. IPA. All right. Now let's see. Show me the values. Let's see where it logged it. There you go. Brew name, Dangerous Precedent, Brewery, KCBC Style IPA. Awesome. Thank you for that. Good shout out, Noah. All right. So we have our beers stored, or well, we know that they're stored in state. We could put them in an atom to make them shareable, but again, no one needs to know this during the form. The only time we might want to know about what's going on in the form is if we want to persist it. I know you've all been there where you close the thing and open it back up and you're like, well, my stuff's gone. A lot of sites have been really good about that. GitHub's one of my favorite. When you're filling out a PR or a review, they pop your information in an object and put it in session storage so that as long as you still have that session, you go back in, bam, your stuff's there, it repopulates. So maybe we can do that at some point if we need to, but there's no need right now. We just want a way to add a brew when we hit enter. So we have our beers that are populated from our hard-coded list, and we have this. What we want to do now is take this list and create a new brew item. Since those current brew items only come from that list of hard-coded brews, we would either have to add to that or do something where we create an atom and have it use that atom. Now, however, those atoms, again, reference back to that original list. So there's still like a manifest of the original brews. Even though only the atoms change when we change things, they're still referencing the ideas that came from this original list. So we'll need a way to change this original list. So what we're going to do is we're going to store this list somewhere where we can make that change. So one thing we can do is we can store the list of IDs in an atom. So you'll have a list of IDs in the atom that our list will render. It'll pass that, it'll have the list of the new brew IDs. It'll pass that down to a brew item, and then they'll create an atom. But the problem with that is whenever we add a brew, think about it this way: we add a brew, the ID goes into this new atom. So now you have this array of these brew IDs. That array of brew IDs, what do we do with it? If we pass it down to the individual brews, it needs to know the name, the brewery, in order to render. So we have to get that info to the beer somehow. So it needs to be stored somewhere. So for now, what we'll do is let's go over to our brew list. And let's persist this list of brews that we're dealing with here. And again, we're just using this list right now to populate the initial atoms. We take this list, we pass it to a brew item then creates an atom from that, and then can modify that atom for its own state and for its display. And then other people can read from that atom. When we add a brew, what we want to happen is we want the new brew to show up in the brew list, right? So the brew list as a whole is going to have to re-render because it's going to insert that new item. But the other items don't have to re-render. They're memoized. We use React Memo, so they won't re-render. But we need a way to render that new brew. So what we're going to do is we're going to persist this list of brews. We're going to persist it somewhere where we can modify it from any component, right? We want our foreign to be able to modify it. We want our brew list to be able to pull it down. So we need some kind of store. So let's try. We're dealing with recoil. Let's try putting it in an atom and see how we can deal with that. Let's see what that does for us. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my atoms and try creating a new one. How we do this without recoil? Without recoil, I would probably use a provider of some sort, like a context provider, and add it to there. Or I would do something where after I've created the item, I would probably, I would take the item. After you hit submit, I'd probably want to store it somewhere where it's accessible. So I think, context would be my first bet. Or what I'd have to do is I'd have to have a handler passed to my form that's like create brew, right? And I'd pass that from the brew list or something, or from the main app, handle create brew, right? And it would call that handler when it was done. And then that handler would live at a higher point in the state tree and trickle down. So that's one option. That's how I do it without recoil. But I think with recoil, we get the benefit of not having to reach up the tree and pass down stuff. So let's try doing it with an atom. And if it runs into issues, then we'll try passing that handle create brew function into that tab. But let's try with an atom first. So we have this atoms thing here. We have our brew item rating. That's just an atom that's storing the ratings right now. I don't think we're actually using this. What we are using is this brew with ID. Brew list state. So we're not using this right now. Let's start using this. So we'll put our brews in here. So let's do this. Brews. Copy these out. So it's an object with keys. And so we'll get rid of this array. All right, brews. And so what we'll do is we will change our brew list to pull instead of from brews, we'll pull from that brew list state. And look, we already have the code from that from last time. Just have to import brew list state from our atoms. So instead of this, we'll import brew list state from / atoms. What is it telling me? it's, oh, you know what? Let's do this. It's going to say it doesn't have a type definition. So we need to make sure this is a TS file. All right. Go back to our brew list state. Use recoil state. Can't find it because we have to put it here. And we actually don't need, actually we will, because we're going to need to set the state. I was going to say we don't need the setter, but we do. So we have our brews, and I'm going to change this to be brews. And let's make sure our app still works. I want to check the web one, because I want to make sure we're still getting the web render benefits. So let's do that. Web console, it looks like they failed to compile. No such file or directory. Brew list state.js. Ah, yes, because we don't have brew list state.js. We have brew list state.ts. So it's probably something to do with this import because we changed the name. So let's try just re-importing brew list state from /Adam/ brew list state. And let's see if that resolves it. It's a little weird, but let's find out. Brew list state.js. Why is it looking for brew list state.js? Let's try refreshing this. Let's see if we might just need to stop our packager and restart it because we changed the file extension. Totally fair, but let's see if it complains. But yeah, so hopefully we can get this brew added. We can get it added to the brew list and we could see it in our list of brews. Then what we'll do is we'll persist that list. So we'll try popping it into async storage or something. This way, when we open up our app, we still have those values. Obviously, long term, if you were actually building this, you'd want to pop it into some sort of database, right? You'd want to store it somewhere. So maybe you'd think about spinning up a node server or using an out-of-the-box solution like Firebase to store it. Plenty of options for that. If you're familiar with any backend languages storing some kind of database, you could use serverless. You can go with the AWS and use serverless lambdas to pop it into Dynamo or something. You can get crazy with it. For now, we're just going to keep it local, persisted on device. The downside being it doesn't share across devices. But again, at some point, we might build a basic node server. I think that could be fun. It's been a while since I've done it. I'd love to try doing it with TypeScript, so maybe we'll do that at some point if people are interested. All right, let's see what it says. Probably some compile issue. No, looks like we're good. Let's try running a web browser. Sometimes you need to close the old one, so let's make sure we do that. All right. Then we might want to pull in that rating thing. That could be kind of cool. Okay, so let's make sure everything still works, and we want to check our renders and stuff. So good. We still have the state where these are updating. They're only rendering things as they change. So we've changed to use the recoil state, but again, we're not modifying it, so we're still getting the benefits here. We're just using it as our initial seed list or something, you could say. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, instead of passing a handler to that other tab, because actually if you think about the way these tabs are laid out, they're at the same level in the state tree. They're actually also at the same level in the UI, right? So this tab is different than this tab. It's at the same level. So this can't pass this tab a handler. So recoil is going to be really nice right here. We're going to be able to still add that brew. And the way we do that is we're going to use recoil state, just like we did here from our add brew screen though. So what I'll do is I usually put my library imports up top and then my personal source inputs below. So I'll put it up here. It's just a preference. I know a lot of people do that. I might have mentioned this already on one of the previous ones, but just a fun habit. I think it's easy to read that way and you can know what's your specific code versus what's library code. So what I'll do is I'll import use recoil state from recoil, and to use that state we just have to use the we have to import the atom so that we know what we're using here. So we'll do that down here. We'll say import brew list rating, or what do we call it? We called it brew list state from /Adam/ brew list state recoil state. Okay, so here we'll do const brews set brew list equals use recoil state. Again, React hook. It's really nice, and we pass it that brew list state. const. Okay. So what do we want to do? We want to add that brew. Now, it's important to understand that the brew list state isn't an array, right? It's an object. If we look at it, we could make it an array if we wanted, but it's an object. And the reason it's an object is because it's keyed on these, but it's going to allow us to easily update and add things and easily remove things, because we could just remove them by ID, look them up by ID. We could make it an array. We'll play around with it. We'll see which one works better. But for now, we'll keep it as an object. And what we'll do is we will simply add a new item. The downside of it being an object is we have to do some extra work to get it to be an array, right? To convert it to an array. We'd have to do like an object.entries, but easy enough. Let's do that. So what we'll do is we're not actually using the brews list, right? We don't need it because we're not rendering anything. We just really need the setter. So one thing that's nice to do is to preface things you're not going to be using with an underscore. It also tells your IDE that you're not going to use it, so it doesn't complain usually about the color and stuff. But so let's go ahead and call set brew list. And so you can see here's our current brews. Actually, we do need it because we need to add to it before we can set it. Because our setter is not expecting a single item. Our setter is expecting the whole list state. And we're going to pass it the whole list state plus our new brew. So let's try it out. So what we'll do is we will, in our setter, let's comment this out. What we're going to do is we're going to say const new brew equals, and we're going to say brew. Let's see. You can see what the object already looks like by either hovering over this. Hovering over this. You can see it has a name, brewery, rating, style, or we can just look here to the left. Either way works. So we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to say name equals brew name, brewery equals brewery. We don't need to do that. Again, we can use shorthand. Rating, we don't have. We're going to set it to 0 initially. Style equals style. And that's it for now. And then what we'll do is we're going to do brews. We'll say new brews equals. We'll use our spread operator to spread our existing brews, and we'll create a new brew. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to use the ID, which you can see we've been doing here. The way we created the ID is we take the name of the brew plus the brewery. Brewery first, then the name of the brew, and we like hyphenate it and lowercase it. So what we can do is we can create that here. We can say const brew key, and maybe we'll move this out to a function later in case we start using it in a few places, but for now, we're just going to use it here. So we'll call it brew ID equals, so we'll combine those two. So we'll do brewery and do dash brew name. And then we want to get rid of the spaces, and we want to lowercase it to make this ID. This is a template string, so it's going to template those in. But then what we want to do is we want to lowercase it. Well, first what we can do is we can do a .replace. And what we want to do is we want to replace all spaces globally with dashes. And this is just a regular expression. And maybe we would write a unit test for this in a real scenario, but we're going to replace all spaces globally with a dash and then call 2 lowercase on it. And we can console.log just to make sure things look right. And we can say new brew ID to be added is, and we'll just pass it brew ID. Okay, so there we have our brew ID made from the brew name and the brewery. And we will say brew ID, and we're going to give it new brew. All right. Now we have the new brews. So what do we have to do? We have to call set brew list and pass it new brews. All right. Let's see if that actually works. And let's see what it does with our app here. This screen doesn't exist. That happens sometimes. What we do for that is we just go back here and we say, hey, give us a web browser. And then all of a sudden it exists. We can also just change the thing up here. Okay. Still here. Add brew. Wow, look. What do we got here? Whoa. Let's see what this is saying. We can handle this in a minute, but unknown handler property on gesture handler will be ignored. Unknown on gesture. It's probably the focus because, again, this is a React Native thing. But hey, we'll deal with that. So brew name, let's do the same brew that Noah was nice enough to add to our chat. So we'll say dangerous precedent. The brewery is KCBC, Kings County Brewing Collective, and the style is IPA, delicious beer. And if we can get the images in here, it'd be so sick. It's got this cool, they have like this really awesome comic book art style, which is just fantastic. They make great beers. Maybe we'll get one. We'll turn the stream up to 18 plus and we'll drink some on stream. We'll see. All right. So let's hit show me the values. So show me the values now is not going to show me the values. It's going to try to add this thing. So let's see what happens. First, let's open up our console. Let's clear it out. We'll fix those up in a little bit. Let's hit this. Okay, new brew to be added. KCBC dangerous precedent. Perfect. Brew ID looks good. Now let's go to our brew list. Bam, there it is. Whoa. What happens if we modify its thing? Awesome. We go back here. We go back here. Still there. Awesome. Thanks, Noah. Yes, it is beautiful. Very cool. We did it. We added it. Now, not very useful if our form persists. I mean, we don't want to keep adding this, so we want to wipe that form out. So let's do that. So to wipe that form out, first let's update these function names to make them a little more clear. So instead of log value, let's say handle add brew. Go down here. Whoa, I don't know. Okay, there we go. Handle add brew. Oh. Why did it do it twice? All right, get rid of that. Format it. All right, what's happening here? Let's go back. Let's go back. Let's go back. Let's go back. Okay, handle add brew. Go down here. Find log values. Change that. Log values doesn't exist anymore. Ah, it changed that thing. That's what it did. Handle add brew. It changed this accidentally. That's why sometimes Vim will do that to you. Okay. Handle add brew, and let's go ahead and clean this up here. So this handles adding our brew, and we want another function that'll handle clearing our input. So we'll call that clear inputs. And the reason for this is because it's not, again, this component isn't unmounting, right? It's staying open. So we just want to clear it out. And with set state, that's super easy. We just want to call these setter functions with an empty string to set those values. So what I can do is I can just do this, copy that here, and change new text to an empty string. All right, what is it complaining about? Oh, I had to make this a function. All right, so let's see if that works. So let's go here. Again, it cleared out because we didn't save anything. It re-rendered. Here you can see it's saying the screen doesn't exist. So we'll just go back here. All brew screen. Go to home screen. Let's go from there. Okay. So it cleared out again because we didn't persist anything yet. Let's clear that. Let's go here. It's going to complain about these on press. We'll fix that in a second. And let's add that beer again. All right. And let's hit show me the values. We'll change this as well to be something more appropriate. Okay, so that didn't do it, didn't clear it because we didn't call the clear function. So let's just go here, see that that's there. Okay, so let's go back here. Let's make sure we call the clear function. So we'll want to call it, and look, it called it out for me. It was light in color. We'll call it right after this. Okay. All right. Cleared it out. Perfect. So you see that part re-rendered, and there's our beer. All right, so now let's see if we can persist this stuff. So that's great. We cleared that out. Awesome. Let's get rid of a few things. So first, let's change this button a little bit. So we'll probably eventually at some point have like a general button style across our app. But the way I usually do it is I put the styling in the component for now. And then when I want to reuse styles, that's when I break out that component into a separate file. It's a pattern a lot of people use. I'm sure if any of you have coded, you've done that. You kind of don't repeat yourself type thing, but I only get to that point when I am actually going to repeat. It may be the case that I never write another button in this app, and this is the only one, so it's perfectly fine here. But I've seen people build out design systems for their single app, and we're not going to get that crazy. We're just going to put the button here. So let's go to style, styles.button, and we'll add a button here. All right. And what we'll do is we will want it to take up the whole width. So we'll do flex 1. We'll give it some padding. We're going to add a style to this just in case. We'll say styles dot button text. Easy enough, right? Put that below here. And one thing you can do, I don't really do it, but you can do it. You can break up your style sheets. So you could have like styles. You could have button styles. It's a separate style sheet. I've seen people do that. Totally viable. Maybe I'm missing out. But yeah, definitely something you can do. Another thing is if you're used to style components, if that's something your office uses or your company uses or you like to use, that's a viable thing to use in React Native as well. Style components are very popular. I like this version for now. I'm used to it and I don't need to pull in style components yet. I will not. But at some point, if I want to do that, I absolutely can. So definitely keep in mind that that is possible. And if you haven't checked out style components, definitely do. It's pretty cool. You might really like it. I used to use CSS modules in the past. I started using style components, again, like I said, with my current job at Electric AI, and I've been really liking it. So worth checking out. All right, button text. I'm just going to give it a size. I just want to give it a font size. That's why I made this. I just want to make sure it's pretty big so we can see it because it was very small before. So let's see what we got right now. Go to home screen. Okay, much better. So what we're going to do is we're going to just do flex direction. Actually, let's just see if we can just align items. Center here. And let's give it like a border just so I can see the button. We'll do border width 1. What is it saying? So we'll go border with 1 and we'll do border color. We'll just do something like, I don't know, FD. That might be too light, whatever. Let's see what it looks like. Yeah, I cannot see that. I know it's there. I do see something, but we can't see that. So let's just do CCC. Okay, much better. And so what we'll do is we'll also we had this margin on the form. Let's take it off the form and put it on the whole thing so the button's also padded in. So we're going to remove the padding from the form container and put it at the regular container level. So now, bam, this thing should move up in a second. There we go. And let's give it some padding vertical just so things are not pushed up to the top. And for that, we'll just do like 24. Center them a little bit. We'll see what it looks like on the actual device, but for now, just so I can easily deal with it. Okay, cool. There's our button. And again, our brews are not being persisted. So let's persist. What do we got here? Tom, my man, sign off. Thanks, Noah. Thanks for hanging out. Definitely catch up later. It's awesome. Thank you for the beer tip for that one. We're going to be using Dangerous Precedent as our brew for the rest of the night. Thanks for that. Brewbook for life. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming. You are what make this, the chat, the one viewer right now. This is great. So yeah, thanks again for hopping in. And again, this will be posted on YouTube. So anyone that wants to watch it or check it out later, that's the place to go. All right. So we got our brew. We got our show the values. That's not what it does. It actually adds the brew. So let's update the name of that. All right. There's our add brew button. So I'm going to put that in again. Cool. So it added it. It didn't take us to the brew screen though. It would be awesome if it took us to the brew screen. So why don't we do that as well really quick, and then we'll persist it, because that would just be a really nice thing to do. So to do that in React Navigation, we just use something called like a link, if I remember correctly. So I'm going to dive into seeing what that looks like. Bottom navigator. I think we can use this. We'll use the name of the screen. So let's look up how to do that. So we'll go to React Navigation. Let me zoom in here so you all can see this. React Navigation. And let's see what we got. All right, so with React Navigation, we want to figure out how to link to that other view. So let's go to the docs. Let me zoom in here so it's not microscopic. That's not useful for anybody, right? And let's look up linking. Link. Very straightforward. Link. Awesome. And then you just do link to. Okay, so we can make our button link to it, but we also want to make sure that our button doesn't just link to it. We need to be able to add the brew. So we need a programmatic link and not just a inline link. So this link would actually just take us to that page, which is great. But we want to make sure we can also run some code, right? We want to be able to add that brew. We don't just want to hop over to the page and be done with it. So let's see if this will let us do anything. So it's same props as use link props. Let's take a look at this. What is use link props? Okay. Sometimes you want different behavior for in-page navigation, such as replace instead of navigate. That's kind of cool. This will be used as an href prop as well as in-page navigation. Very cool. But what we want is programmatic navigation. So let's see how we do that. I remember in the old version, you would just say, you would grab the navigator that gets passed to each property by default and call that. But let's see. Navigate to. This is for nested screens, deep linking. Navigation.navigate. So we need to figure out how to get this object. So let's look at that. Moving between screens. There's an A. It changes. Oh, so we can just change the href. Like that's like fine for web, right? But we want to make sure this works for navigation. So here. It's given a navigation prop. And it calls navigation.navigate. So if this screen is given a navigation prop, and we can pass that to this component, let's see if this is actually given a navigation prop. We also should probably specify what kind of props this component will get using our types. So we can figure out what type navigation is because I'm sure React Navigation comes with some types. So what we would do there is we would say type add brew screen props equals navigation. And we need to figure out what type this is. So what you could do, I generally just start typing the name of the library and see if it can autocorrect and fill and kind of guess at it. So import from React Navigation. Ooh, is it? That's why at React Navigation. at React. Navigation, stack. I'm not sure which part it's coming from, but let's see if it's from here. Navigation context. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Let's find out. Refers to value. We need to use it as a type. Navigation prop. Let's see what it says. Navigation prop. It takes route name. Okay, so it takes a record. Generic type navigation prop requires between 1 and 5 arguments. So let's see how we can best use this. Let's do a search here. Navigation prop, React navigation, TypeScript. Type checking with TypeScript. Let's open this up here. To type check your route name and params, the first thing we do is create an object with type mappings for route name to the params of the route. For example, so we have a route called profile in our route navigator, which should have a param user ID. So Sarah in here said, I think you can have LR through props. So let's see. Let's try just doing it like, let's see, what does this say? Navigation. Type any for now. Let's try something really quick. Let's see. Just want to see something here. Navigation. Root stack, create navigation, name, profile, initial params. To authenticate the navigation prop, we need to import the corresponding type from the navigator. For example, stack navigation prop. Okay. Profile screen navigation prop. Stack navigation prop. Okay, so so it breaks it down here. So we have import stack navigation prop. In our case, we are using a tab navigation. Well, actually, let's see. Tab 2 stack we have is a stack navigator. That's for the, that's for the tab 2 stack. But as the whole thing here, we have our bottom tab navigator. So this is the stack, this is the bottom tabs, and so we can use that. And what we can do, it looks like we can say probably bottom navigation prop, bottom tab navigation prop. So let's try that. There we go. And we would say, let's see what they're doing here. So they basically pass that to bottom tab navigation prop, root stack params list, profile. Okay, cool. So we need to import the corresponding type. Done. The type for navigation prop takes 2 generics. The param list object we defined earlier. That's up here. Which we'll have to define. And then it takes this allows us to type check route names and params, which when you're navigating using navigate and push. The name of the current route is necessary to type check the params when you call set params. So we need to put the name of the current route. Very interesting. Okay, so let's give that a shot. So let's see what they did here with root stack param list. Root stack param list. So you have, similarly, we need to do the same for each route. Interesting. To type check our route name and params, the first thing we need to do is create an object type with mappings for route name to the params of the route. For example, say we have a route called profile in our route navigator, which should have a param user ID. So in this case, we don't have any parameters, but what we can do is we can just say profile and just empty. So let's try that. First, let's put this here. It's our placeholder. Let's see. So the through prop. So that would mean for link, what we could do is have, yeah, we could probably have it call that. Let's see. Let me see really quick what that's about. So let's look up link. Let's go to the link props. So let's see here. What do we got? Platform equals web. So this is just doing some different switch. Equals web. Use link props on press to action. I got it. I see. So you can use link props. We have on press props to an action. Link button. That's pretty cool. So this created a link button, which takes to action, children, rest, and can actually just use link props. That's very cool. That's awesome. Okay, let's try that. So, well, in this case, we don't want to just use on press because we want to call our function, but then maybe we can call on press. So let's try this. Let's see if we can do this one. So what we'll do here is instead of doing all this and pass the navigation, let's delete that, delete that, delete that. Let's pull in that use link props from React Navigation. Import use link from, where is it imported from? React Navigation native. Got it. From React Navigation native. And we'll want to import use link props. And here we'll get, so we pass it to an action, and we get on press and props. So const press props, use link props to action. We don't need the action right now, so for 2 we'll pass. We want to go to the all brews screen. So he said, yes, I think you can have the navigation object on any screen that is wrapped with your navigation. I'm not sure. I never use it with TypeScript. Yeah, I think in the past, I've never done it with TypeScript either, but yeah, any component that was wrapped with that navigation gets the navigator prop passed to it. In old versions, when you're configuring tabs, you actually had to manually set, if you wanted it to refer to the parent, I'd have to set, navigation equals parent.navigator. But yeah, it looks like now everything is passed. But what I'm going to try to do here is it looks like there's a hook for using a link button, and it gives us an onPress function that'll probably navigate there that we can probably just call right after our handle add brew. So I'm going to see if that works. We'll see what happens. And then we won't have to actually type out our navigation, because if we do put that property in here, it's going to explicitly have it as an any, which isn't ideal. I mean, we could use that to get past if we needed to, but I usually do like to figure out the types there. It just seemed a bit complex for right now, so I'll try to use this, see if this does anything. So we'll get an onPress from this. We're going to go to all brews screen, and now lets us use our nice hook API. And so what we'll do is here what they're doing is they're pulling this out from use link props. It takes it to an action, and then passing that to onPress. They're calling the onPress, but what we'll do is we'll call the onPress from here. let's see, what does it say? OnPress, expected one argument got 0. So what does it expect? Argument for E was not provided. Because we probably need to pass on whatever OnPress is passing because it's a handler, so handle brew. So what we can do is we can take in an E here. And what this will do is this is going to be whatever comes from our click of our actual touchable highlight. And so in this case, if we go to touchable highlight, we can see what that provides. We can also use touchable opacity. Actually, touchable opacity probably looks better. But let's see. So if we go to the OnPress here, in this case, it doesn't take anything. So I'm wondering if we can just, let's see. Why do we need to provide an argument? Gesture responder. Okay. React mouse event or mouse event. Okay. So what we can do is we can, let's see. Let's do this. Let's take a look at what our touchable highlight is going to do here. So it's calling OnPress. Let's look at the docs for the actual OnPress. No, nothing. It inherits from this. Called when touch released, if not canceled. And let's see, is there anything about what it gets passed, if anything? I don't think it actually is passing anything. So let's see. In this case, what are they doing? They're just calling it as part of touchable opacity. So it must pass something along. Let's try, for now, let's call the OnPress and see if it even does the linking that we want. So it's not going to add the brew, but we'll see if it actually does the linking. So from here, we'll say OnPress equals OnPress. So let's see if it actually does linking, because if it doesn't, then hey, we don't even need it. We'll figure that out in a second. Let's see what happens here. So let's open up our web view, go back here, go to home screen, and let's see if that button links us back. No. Oh, pass must start with a slash, so let's try that. It's a helpful error. All right, let's see. Go back to home screen. Awesome. Let's go here. We're going to fix up these errors. This is something to do with our focus. Not found, but it did try to do something. Let's see what it tried to do there. It might just be the name of our screen. So let's see. / alt brew screen not found. So let's see what, I have an idea. Let's see what our path is when we go to our brew screen. Brews all brew screen. So let's do that. Brews all brew screen. All right. Go back to home screen. Click here. Click here. Still does not exist. Let's see what's going on here. Maybe. Let me try refreshing. Just make sure. Okay, there we go. So it's brews all brew screen. This is add brew screen. Let's see. You know what we can do? Let's see if we inspect this, what it actually has on it. So it's rendering it as a div. There's our div. Okay. So it's not rendering any kind of anchor tag because we're not using a link, right? And when we go there, not found. So we can't see. Let's see if this console tells us anything about where it tried to go. That would be helpful. So on gesture handle, that's for the input still. So nothing about where it tried to go. So let's see if we got anything wrong here. Brews all brews screen. All brews screen. That should be right. Let's see. Maybe because let's try going to, I have an idea. Let's try going to tab 1 because that's the actual route that we want to go to. So let's try going to tab 1, see if that works. No? Okay, interesting. So let's go ahead and do this so we can move on. Oh, let's see what happened there. There was an interesting thing. It gave us a little back button there. So it is adding us to the page. So probably what we actually need is just, the navigator go back, just similar to what we were talking about earlier, is pulling the navigator in. So we'll return to this one. I'm not sure what's going on with this use link props. So let's just try this. Like we mentioned, we'll use an any for now to move past that. And we'll make it to do to actually type it at some point. I'll look into how to do that the right way. But so what we'll do is let's go back to here. Let's go back, change our thing back to onPress. So we have the correct onPress. Let's get rid of this. Let's pull in a navigator. Give it an implicit type of any. See what it says there. Sorry, I had to do this. All right, and if we go back here, we have our React navigation. Oh, there we go. And we want moving between screens. Okay, navigation. Has implicit type any. So what we'll do is we'll just say type add brew screen props equals navigation any for now. And then we just need to say here add brew screen props. All right. So that's a way to get past it. But what we're going to do is we're going to put it to do. Fix this type. So we'll actually type that later. So sorry about that. We got a little snagged up, but let's keep on going. So we got our navigation, so we can get rid of this stuff. We're not going to use this. Sorry. There we go. And let's go ahead and get rid of use link props up here. Get rid of this. We're not going to use this right now. And let's try calling navigation.navigate, and we'll see if we can navigate to that route. So what we'll do is we'll do navigation.navigate. And where we want to go is, I think we want to go to the name of our route, which I believe is all brew screen, but we'll see because that didn't work with the past. Let's see if it actually works with this. Save that. Let's go here, go to our web view, go back here, and let's see what happens. So we're here. Perfect. Okay. Hey, unfortunately, it added an empty brew. That's because we need to put some validation into effect to make sure there actually is, properties there. But at least it navigates back, so that's great. So let's try refreshing that, creating the brew, and seeing the whole flow. There we go. So we go to our add brews, set our new brew, dangerous precedent, brewery is KCBC, styles IPA. We add the brew, we're taken to the page, and there we go. Awesome. All right, so now we're going to talk about persistence. We want to persist it so that these things don't just disappear when we close the app, right? What would be the point of that? Now, as I mentioned, we're not going to persist on the server right now. We're just going to persist on the app using local app storage. And there's a few ways to do that. So I'll show you with Expo. We have async storage. And it's going to be interesting to see how this plays with the web version. But so async storage, let's see. Is there a... All right. So we have to install async storage, and then we can check out the documentation over here. Ooh, nice dark mode. All right, so async storage. It has a set item and a get item. And basically what we can do is we can use this to store our values. We're going to store these values on the device, and it's asynchronous because it happens asynchronously, right? It's going to store these values, and it's going to take a certain amount of time, so we'll handle it in that way. We haven't yet touched upon how to store or sync atoms via Recoil, we will get into that. For now, what we'll do is we'll figure out a way to import async storage and see if we can pull down the values from the atoms and actually store them there. The cool thing about Recoil is it gives you hooks into when your atoms change so that you can actually hook into this process and do it. Similar to like something you would do with Redux middleware. If any of you have ever used Redux, I know a popular way to handle storage on React Native was to do it via middleware. You'd have a middleware listening for actions that were being emitted and dispatched. If the action had a certain type, it would store that value, whatever the state change was, in storage as part of that flow. So cool little side effect. So we'll see how that works with Recoil. So you can see here there's set item and then there's get item. That's how we get the data back. What I'm interested in, as I mentioned, is how it's going to play with the Expo native. Maybe it's going to fall back and just use local storage. If not, we'll just do a check. We'll do a check for the platform. If we're on OS, we'll use this. If we're not, we'll use local storage. But let's get started. Let's install this here. And we'll also want the types. So I'm just going to stop that really quick. We'll install this and we'll just do, oh, that's not what I want. I wanted the install. So it said here that I just need to install it. Yep, there we go. Let's copy that. We'll have Expo install it. Awesome. So yeah, so hopefully it's going to be pretty easy to pull this stuff out of Recoil. Let's take a look while this is installing it, what that's going to look like. So I'm going to pull up the RecoilJS docs. I'll zoom in for you so everyone can see. And I will go to the persistence portion. Here we go, state persistence. So important note right there, right on the top, what we want to pay attention to. API is currently under development, will change. Please stay tuned. That's okay. We're just doing this for funsies. It's marked with unstable, which is a good note to us when we're looking at the code that this thing can change. And if it changes, we'll update. We're kind of on like the canary edition of this, or like bleeding edge, where we're trying to get early in and start using it now. And I think it's fine. We'll use this. We're not shipping this to production, so we don't have to worry about any kind of downside. Now, if you are using this in a production app, I'm sure you would really want to think about using this, especially you can see here they've marked it with unstable, which is a sign that, hey, you should not be using this in production. It's under development. The API will change. There will be breaking changes. So again, warning, if you're going to be doing this on production, I wouldn't use this. As they've mentioned, it's not complete. But for our purposes, let's just go with it. So let's see what it looks like. So it says to save state, subscribe to atom changes and record the new state. You can use React effects to subscribe to individual atoms. Interesting. So we could subscribe to individual atoms. However, Recoil provides a hook to allow you to subscribe to state changes for all atoms. Very cool. Use transaction observer unstable. So we will probably just for now want to watch that brew list atom, right? Because that's got the whole like definitive list. So let's take a look at this. Asynchronous state sync. But let's read on and see what the deal is with this one. So the subscription call provides all of the atom state and tells you which atoms change. That's pretty cool. For this, you can save the changes with the storage and serialization of your preference. In our case, async storage for native, local storage probably for web for now. Or hey, we could pull in local forage and store it via that. We could use web SQL, right? IndexedDB, something like that. So let's see what it looks like using JSON. So they have this function, gives you the atom values, atom info, and the modified atoms, loops over the modified atoms, and calls storage.set item. Hey, very similar API to our async storage, right? Set item with the modified atom and the stringified value. Very cool. What is this? Atom values.get values. Okay, so it gives you the modified atom, but to get the values, you have to call this. All right, that's pretty cool. So we don't need this one because we only really care about that brew list state atom. So let's go to our asynchronous state sync and let's see what that's about. Again, another under development API. So we will want to stay tuned for changes, but let's see what the deal is with this. Ooh, sync state from server, bidirectional syncing, syncing state with parameters, data flow graph. Very cool. All right, let's go through this a little bit. Local state example. Example provides the friend status as local state only. So this is something we've been using, right? Use recoil state. Very, very straightforward. From the server, we can subscribe to asynchronous changes in the remote state and update the atom value to match. This can be done using standard React useEffect hook. So here they have useEffect, subscribe to current user ID subscription is use set recoil state. That's just to get the setter. And they have an unsubscribe. So subscribe to current user ID. Interesting. And it's calling set current user ID. Very interesting. So bidirectional syncing. You can also sync the state so local changes are updated on the server. Note that this is a simplified example. Please take care to avoid feedback loops. They're calling use recoil state. They have their current user ID and their setter. Known server current user ID. So this is the current user ID from the server. Okay, so this is about syncing like client to server. Let's see what else we have. You can also use the atom family. Atom's family. Helper to sync local state based on parameters. Note that each call of this example hook will create a subscription, so take care to avoid redundant usage. All right. So interesting. So you have your atom family, friend status. Interesting. All right, so it looks like this is pretty cool. Interesting. So it's looking like this is good for syncing stuff, but I think, so that'll let us subscribe to individual atoms. And that's kind of like what we would want to do is subscribe to that atom. And it looks like the way they're doing it, like in the friends, this case here, use friend status subscription. Interesting. Subscribe to friend status. Huh. I'm wondering where these come from. Interesting. Doing this less easy. Okay. Very cool. All right, so let's do this. Let's just simply, instead of doing what they're doing at remote state API, subscribe to current user ID. So basically they're passing this subscriber the actual setter function. But what I'm wondering is where this bit comes from. Is that something they've implemented? Is it part of this? So let's take a look. Atom family returns a function that returns a writable recoil state atom. Interesting. Let's see. What is this doing? All right. So here we have element position, use recoil value, element position, state family, element ID. Atom family takes almost the same options as a simple atom. However, the default value can also be parameterized. Oh, this means you can provide a function which takes the parameter value and returns the actual default value. Very cool. So this is not what we need to worry about here. So what we'll do is we'll use this. We'll do the modified atom, but what we'll do is we'll just look to see if the atom that we've modified is the one we actually care about, which in this case would be the brew list state. So let's add this function. Obviously, we're going to change it a little bit, but let's go ahead and put this under, let's put it in like a utils. Or maybe we can even expose it as some sort of hook, but for now I'll put it in like a utils. So we'll add a folder here at the root level. We'll call it persister or something. copy this. We're going to change it a bunch. So instead of persistence observer, we'll call it, we can call it that. That's a good name. But we'll make it a function. For now, and what we'll do is we will pass in the atom that we want to watch. So in this case, we'll call it brew list state. And this will be of type, actually, let's just pass the ID brew list state. And we'll use this function, which we'll pull from recoil. Import use transaction observer unstable. Again, unstable is in the name. You know it's going to be unstable. It's right there in the name. Come on, you know it. So we got use recoil unstable. Let's see what it says. No, that's because it's unstable. So let's see how, if we actually probably need to, it probably isn't maybe exported from recoil default, so we probably need to go into dist and pull it out somehow. Let's see. Let's see what's going on here. So from recoil, let's see. Interesting. Okay, there it is. Use oh, so it just changed the name. Use recoil transaction observer unstable. Okay. And so it's going to complain about the types. Atom values does not exist on type snapshot, snapshot, previous snapshot. So this is going to give us a snapshot. Is that what we actually want? Let's see. Maybe we're not using the right thing here. What is this thing called? Use transaction observer. Use transaction observer. All right, so let's mess with this. Let's see. Let's try using what they provide. A snapshot, previous snapshot. Let's try that. Again, they said it was unstable, so maybe it's just this is the new version. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a debugger and see what we deal with. That's like the easiest way I can think of doing it. Let's just kind of see what we're dealing with here. We could also console.dir out the snapshot. But putting a debugger will allow us to view what's going on. And so here we have the persistence observer. It's going to take, we have it as a function. We don't actually need it as a function. We can make it as an object. But we will, let's see, let's do this. Let's see, why are they, here they're using it as a function. Okay. Let's see how they're using it. Storing state. Okay, so let's see how they're using it here. Persistence observer, and they're wrapping. Oh, they just have it underneath their recoil root. Okay, so that's what we'll do. So we'll do the same thing there, just so we're following. Persistence observer, it should be a function. Okay, and let's export that. All right, and let's go ahead and in our, we're using our recoil root. I can just search for that, but I know it's in our app there. Yep, we can import that persistence observer. So let's do that. Import persistence observer from, I guess in our utils, utils / persister. Since we're just sticking with that name, let's just go and change it from persister back to persistence observer. Just makes more sense. Persistence observer. Yes. And there we go. And it says we just got to put it in here underneath our root. Okay, what does it say? I spelled it wrong probably too. I did indeed spell it wrong, so we'll fix that. Fix that. Okay, what did it say? Cannot be used as a JSX component. Its return type void is not a valid JSX element. Ah, right, of course. So in here, they're not returning anything either. We have this. Let's see, what is going on here? For this. Let's see, do we need to return something from here? Let's see what we can do here. Okay, that's right. We don't need that for now. Want to see what we're doing with this, how they're able to use it as a JSX component. We'd have to return something, right? Right now it's returning void. So maybe we just return this. Let's see what happens. So here it says it's still returning void. Persistence observer is this function, right? Not a valid JSX element. I mean, that's correct. It's not. So what if we just import it and call it within, let's see. It might just be because this all changed that it's different. So let's see what we can do here. Persistence observer. Use transaction observer. Okay, so that our function where we set the item, got that. Yeah, so here's an example we talked about. Restoring state. The initialized state prop. So that's where they're getting it from the value, right? And they're calling that. That's great. So that's how you pass it to your, that's how you rehydrate your app with that. That's awesome. It's important to use this instead of manually setting. Got it. But this thing is the interesting part, that we're not able to pull that out. So let's see what we can do about that. Maybe it's just a matter of maybe we have to export that whole bit. Let's see. Or maybe, actually, let's try this. Let's try this. Let's do no, I don't want that. So now we've called the function. It's going to return that recoil transaction observer unstable. So the result of that. And now let's see what it's complaining about. So we can see what types we're dealing with. Property does not exist on type JSX intrinsic element. Got it. Okay. So my one concern would be if this has to be used inside recoil state. I'm sure it has to be used inside recoil root. But maybe we can instantiate it just inside a component that's within the recoil root. Like that's what I'm thinking maybe. So instead of doing this here, we can do something like for our brew list, we can import it here. And see what happens. So like something like so this is just going to import the function. But what if when I import it, I just do export defaults observer. Let's see what happens. Let's put a breakpoint. So we'll open up our brew rating here. All right, we gotta start our server. And we're a little past 11, but I kind of wanted to see if this works. And if not, we'll pick it up next stream, see where we go. But yeah, it's, again, this is like one of those unstable APIs, so we got to play around with it, see how it's best used. And if we can't get this to work, we can write something similar on our own. Basically, all we need to do is persist that brew list. So what we can do is, right before we set the atom, we could just persist the brew list ourselves in async storage, and then use that syncing to set the initial state of the recoil root. And that's just a fair way to do it if we don't want to actually hook into this listening for items thing. But it'd be cool if it works. Let's try it out. Run in web browser. All right. Compiling there. All right, let's see. Let's put our breakpoint on. Okay, so nothing there. It's not hearing anything there. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's get rid of this for now. Get rid of this. And what we'll do is we will just, for now, just for the web version, we'll pop it in local storage. We'll change our helper to just be a persister layer that takes our brew list state. And for now, what we'll do is just pop that thing in local storage, and then we'll add it to use async storage. So for now, what we'll do is we'll say const persistence observer. We'll actually call this persist state equals function, and what we'll do is we'll just do, we'll pass it the brew list state, and we'll pass it a key, and we'll make the key brews. So we'll say key equals item, and what we'll do is we'll say local storage dot set item key value. Just basic. And then what we can do is, the reason we're just wrapping this in a persist state thing is because we can swap it out for async storage when we're dealing with that, and local storage for web. But for now, we'll make this an async function so we can call it in an asynchronous way. Key is going to be a string, and the value, it should be an any. And what we'll do is we will do stringified value equals JSON dot stringify value, and we'll just go ahead and do that. For now, we'll just do it in local storage. So here in our add brew screen, right after this, we're going to import our, we won't call it persistence observer, we'll call it persist state. And so in our add brew screen, we'll import that for now. So we'll do import persist state from utils / persist state. It's an asynchronous function. We have to export it. All right, we can get rid of this. We're not using that right now. And here we will call persist state down here. And it's asynchronous, but we actually don't care right now about the response. We will actually look into making sure that it's successful, but for now we'll just kind of fire and forget. So what we're going to do is we'll call, right after this, we'll call persist state. We'll say that the key is bruise, and we'll pass it new bruise. And then here, when we actually hydrate the app, we'll pull that out. So maybe we'll have like a restore state. But if you look here, we remember that it had that, where is it? Right here, where we can pull the initialized state. So the initialized state, though, is going to be a representative of all the atoms, and it's whatever the return result of this is. So we can't necessarily match that exact value. But what we can do, and so we probably can't use this just yet, because we actually want, if you look at the initialized state here, it looks like it's actually getting entries, set get atom with key. So it's actually doing some stuff with the atoms. But what we can do is we can check before we pull our brews from our brew list state, we can check and see if there's anything in local storage. So in our brew list, where we have this brew list state that we're pulling from, in our brew list state component, we have a default. We can pull our default from local storage for now. May not be the right way to do it for now, but again, until we can figure out how to use that API, let's try that. So what we'll do is we'll say const default brews equals local storage dot get item brews, and then we'll do const brews, or we'll say default brews equals JSON, because again, this local storage is going to give us a string that parse default brew string. And let's see if that works. And so what we'll do, so we have to say that, we have to specify that this is going to be a string. And if we look here, it's going to say, let's see, type string or null is not assignable to type string. So it could be null, right? So that's something worth noticing. So what we would do in that case is we would default to this list here. So what I'll do is I'll say, just for now, we're going to use this. So we'll say, we'll call this fallback list equals fallback brews. That. And we'll set this equals get item string or empty string. And then so this will parse that, and we'll have our default brews, and we'll set default equal to default brews or fallback brews. Meaning if default brews proves to be an empty string, when it gets evaluated, it'll be empty, which will be falsy, and then we can default to fallback brews. And I'll just put a breakpoint here so we can debug this and see how this actually plays out. So if we go to our website here, we can refresh this. Oh, we got an unexpected end of JSON input in our brew list state. Let's go there. Let's see what's happening here. So our default brew string is empty, so JSON parse of that will fail, which is, I believe, what is happening here. Yep. Okay, so what we want to do there is, if it's empty, we'll set it equal to that. We'll set it equal to JSON.stringify fallback brews, and then we can actually get rid of this or here. Or even better, so that we're not converting that to a string, what we'll do is we'll say default brews equals default brews string. If it's there, we'll parse it. Otherwise, fallback brews. There we go. And here what this is saying is, again, string or null is not assignable to type string. We don't need to, it's going to have inference, so we can get rid of this. And here we just need one of these. And there we go. So again, what we're doing here is we're getting the brews from local storage. If that string is there, so if there is something, it's not just an empty string, we'll parse it. Otherwise, we'll go with fallback brews. And so here we have default brews string here is equal to an empty string. Well, let me just refresh it first. Okay. Empty string, because we never put anything there, right? So it's going to go with fallback brews. There's our brews, and our app will populate. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and add a brew. We'll use the brew that we used in the beginning. Dangerous precedent. Brewery is KCBC, and the style is IPA. So at this point, it should store it into local storage when I add brew. Okay, let's go ahead and look at our application tab and see if it put it there. Local storage. There's our brews object, and you can see it has that value. So if I refresh, let's see what happens. Okay. Gonna try to grab those brews. There, it got the brews. Let's see if it actually parses it. And it's gonna set the default brews. There's our KCBC. And we go home. And there's our KCBC. Awesome, it's persisted. So again, we're just using local storage. So this isn't gonna work with the mobile app. We're gonna actually do a check in our persistence layer to see if we're on the mobile app, and we'll pull the brews from there at that point. So thanks again. We're a little bit over. If you stuck around, thanks. I appreciate it. Anyone that showed up today, really appreciate it. Sarah, thanks for your tips and help out. Noah, thanks for giving me some awesome brews and for hanging out in the beginning. Again, this will be posted on YouTube. The actual repo is open source, so check it out, pull it down, submit PRs. Next week, we're going to dive a little bit more into the form. We'll persist it onto the actual app, the mobile app, using async storage. Maybe we'll start working on that recoil persistence, or maybe we'll just wait till that API is stable and hold off for now. We'll start getting this thing looking a little bit more like our design. Obviously, we're still not there yet. It's going to take a little while, but we'll get there. We got this form now. We'll probably add the rating. We'll add the style. Keep building on it. Thanks again for sticking around. Again, I'm Tom McGurl. My Twitter URL is above there. If you're feeling generous, hit me a follow on Twitter. Hit up the GitHub to check out the the repo, pull it down. And yeah, thanks for stopping by. Appreciate you. And I'll see you next Tuesday. My schedule is 9 to 11. I'm going to try to stick with that. Maybe kick in some sessions in between. But again, thanks for hanging around. Catch you later.